Hello?
Hello? Charlie?
No, it's your neighbor.
In the current political climate, many entertainers find themselves feeling like they're stepping through a metaphorical minefield each day. Thanks to social media and the internet at large, every word and action is under constant scrutiny. Because if they don't take care as to what they say, they may be another in the list of those that have fallen victim to a certain something called cancel culture. A phenomenon known as canceling shows, movies, and people seen as problematic, in a sort of cleaning house sort of move. We've seen it happen quite often over the last decade or so to varying degrees of success. And on paper, one show that would appear to be ripe for communal martyrdom would be It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I mean, the series' first 2 episodes revolve around racism and statutory thing that I can't say without being demonetized. Talk about coming out of your gate swinging. The show depicts our main character as an apparent protagonist partaking in substance abuse, racism, sexism, physical assault, and a multitude of other actions that should have put most of them in prison long ago. And yet, here we are in the year of our Lord 2020, and the show is currently sitting at 14 seasons, holding the record for most seasons of a live-action sitcom in television history. But how can a show as apparently vulgar and horrible as Sunny avoid cancel culture for as long as it has? Always Sunny is basically Explain It Like I'm 5, the show, but the 5-year-olds in question are alcoholics. It essentially approaches complex and controversial ideas from the point of view of a child, despite demonstrating a clear understanding of the issue. Essentially a vulgar version of the very popular subreddit, Explain It Like I'm 5. If there's one thing that people love, it's feeling like the smartest person in the room. And what better way to do that than to surround yourself with the most certifiably dumb people you can find? The modern life is complicated and only continues to get more so as the days go by. Sometimes the best way to understand it is to view it through the lens of a child and boiling down the complexities of society to its most simple building blocks. There's a great subreddit called Explain Like I'm 5 that does this, taking complex and making it easy enough for a 5-year-old to understand. While none of our main characters are actually 5, they're certainly not the brightest. They are self-important, inconsiderate, short-sighted, and belligerent. Not the kind of people you'd go to for an explanation of, for example, the current climate in America about gun ownership rights. And yet, by watching these idiots assume they are smart enough to tackle the issue, and attempt to do just that in the episode Gun Fever 2, Still Hot, we get a much broader understanding of the big picture just by watching their misgivings lead them to hilarious dead ends. But more on this specific example later in the video. Always Sunny doesn't have the market cornered on using edgy humor to carry parody, nor is it the first to do so. Long ago, in the far-off prehistoric era known as 1997, South Park hit the scene. But you likely know this tale, so I'll spare you the details as our attention is instead spent on one Eric Cartman. Yes, the seemingly ageless little boy you know well appears in all your favorite episodes and on nearly all South Park merch. Which begs the question, is Cartman the hero of South Park? No, definitely not even close. Cartman is a horrible human being. No one will doubt that. Nor could you doubt that Sunny's Dennis Reynolds is a truly horrid example of a human being. Both clear examples of the worst kinds of people. Relentlessly disrespectful, unempathetic, and occasionally begging the question of, why aren't they in prison?
Look, if you don't come and do the show, I'll make you eat your parents. Yeah, whatever, kid. He'll do it, dude.
But what separates Eric Cartman from Dennis Reynolds? Not a lot, to be honest, for all the reasons I just said. At least not within the frame of their narratives. No, this is about merchandising. Put on your Ushanka, grab your vodka, and bring your mind back to pre-USSR collapse because it's time to theorize about the dangers of capitalism and multi-level marketing. Okay, don't go. I promise this isn't as boring or in-depth as it seems. Now, imagine yourself in a Hot Topic or Spencer's. Yes, there are still Spencer's, I googled it. And picture the section of the wall dedicated to the merchandise for one South Park. What does it look like? Likely most would be plastered with the image of Eric Cartman, right? Now, imagine you've never watched South Park, and even that this pop culture shop is the first place you visited since emerging from the doomsday bunker that your father Ivan had built and placed you in sometime in the 80s. With no prior knowledge of this property, you might think that this vulgar child was the hero of the story. And yes, this is a very cursory and shallow observation, but consider also that South Park is 23 years old, and that children born well into its popularity would also be inundated with this Cartman merchandise, and also without prior knowledge to the property. This show is plenty old enough that an entire generation of budding adults could have grown up under the vague impression that Cartman was the hero, wearing shirts and using Cartman's classic zingers under the misinterpretation of the show's parody actually being idolization. Now, I'm not saying South Park or any show similar to it is raising a generation of bigots like the character of Eric Cartman, but it is worth pointing out that occasionally a parody can be a little too good. That in the case of characters like Eric Cartman or Rick Sanchez of Rick and Morty, a show that I'm definitely not smart enough to talk about, there can be a critical miscommunication between the creator and the consumer as to whether or not you're supposed to admire these characters. Which brings us back to Dennis Reynolds. Arguably a very similar character to Eric Cartman, but with one critical difference: he's pathetic. Whereas Cartman's antics might end at a punchline, Dennis's adventures often end in giving the viewer an uncomfortable sense of pity. Dennis always loses in one way or the other, and even when he doesn't, it never nets him any gain, nor does it change him in any way. At the end of every episode of Sunny, he's still the same vain, inept substance addict that he was at the beginning. The point here being, there's never any question as to who the villain is or who the butt of every joke is in Always Sunny. The show makes it very clear that you're laughing at the gang, not with them. And to circle all the way back to merchandising, well, putting Dennis Reynolds' face on a t-shirt honestly just sounds like something that he would do himself. Perhaps in some variation of the unreliable narrator trope, the gang, in a meta-sense, are notable for never truly picking a side in a debate, unless of course there's a side that has more alcohol. Though the writers often use the series to tackle broader political and societal discussions, the gang isn't quite so capable, or willing usually, to understand the nuances themselves. Their roles are unwilling playthings in the writer's sandbox. The best example of this may be the episode Gun Fever 2, Still Hot. And of course, let's consider this your spoiler warning for this episode of Always Sunny. In the episode, the gang tackles gun ownership in America, but like in their way. Charlie and Mac want to bring more guns onto the street and into schools, but Dennis and Dee are determined to prove that there are too many guns out there and just how easy it is to actually get guns. Obviously, in typical Sunny fashion, neither accomplishes this. But in their parting ways, they approach the topic from both sides of the issue. And not only this, along the way, they each encounter the failings of their own arguments. Oh, and they immediately flip-flop ideals at the first sign of pushback. But I digress, even though this is obviously just the structure of the episode's joke, and a build-up to a punchline in the form of a third perspective, we'll get there, the intent is there. The writers of the show are using the very dumb people to express why many issues in the modern world are far more complicated than can be solved by a gut reaction and a one-layered plan. But the real kicker of the episode comes in the form of Frank, the rich guy who profited off the gang's panic and arguing the whole time. And this is the third perspective the writers present. That of the rich elite being the one to come out on top when those below buy into the fear and strife they sow into their own lives. Again, this is just a punchline in the show, and the gang immediately buys into the next scheme right after he reveals his intentions the first time. But this is what Always Sunny does best, frame genuine societal and political questions in the form of humor. And by doing so from every angle, they only make the show more rewatchable as the years pass. Gun Fever 2 came out a decade ago, but feels just as relevant and fresh as it did in 2010. I could go on and on about all the other reasons listed, but the clearest answer to the question is this. It feels good to see bad things happen to bad people. The show never has any qualms about demonstrating that the main cast are not good people in any way, shape, or form. Most often, they aren't even the good guys in their own story. So, when their plans go awry and the real world hits them harder than a brick thrown off the roof by Macaulay Culkin circa 1992, we as the audience get the satisfaction of knowing that, in a way, good triumphed over evil in the end, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is called Schadenfreude. Enjoyment attained from the trouble of others. It feels good, doesn't it? But anyways, this has been 10K Bill, and thanks for watching. Comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next. Follow me on Twitter at 10K Bill to yell at me about anything I may have missed. Support us on our Patreon if you like this show and want to see more content like it. And of course, make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment related content.